Patsy reassuring Dottie with the words, "Don't worry about me. When it's my time to go, it's my time."
On a moonlit highway, a radio crackles with voices long gone, their songs spinning like worn vinyl over hearts. Country music's golden era lives in memory, yet every shining stage hides shadows. Today you'll hear confessions that surfaced only when the lights dimmed. 20 legends, each bearing a secret heavier than a twanging string, spoke final words revealing hope, regret, and chilling foresight. Lean in. This isn't nostalgia. It's a ride through premonitions, guilt, shattered love, and demons tabloids never captured. By the end, you may never hear these classics the same way again, and you'll wonder what truths your own heroes still guard in silence. Hank Williams Sr. once laughed that he'd never get out of this world alive, but friends knew the joke masked a haunting dread. In late December of 1952, sitting in the back seat of a Cadillac and gulping down cough syrup cut with bourbon, he whispered to his driver that he'd never see 30. He would not. Hours later, the 29-year-old icon was found limp, his final ride frozen on Highway 61. The confession wasn't bravado, it was resignation from a man who felt destiny tightening around his fragile frame. Even now, when his lonesome yodel echoes through the airwaves, you can almost hear that quiet admission riding beneath the fiddle, warning that foreboding and fame often share the same smoky stage forever etched into ballad lore. Patsy Cline owned a voice so rich it could melt jukebox steel, yet the singer spent her last tour murmuring premonitions that chilled everyone around her. During a smoky backstage chat in Kansas City, she pressed a hand to her heart and told fellow performers she sensed her time was almost up. Only days later, she boarded a small Piper Comanche to Nashville, shrugging off storm warnings. Mid-flight turbulence battered the wings as though destiny itself had grabbed the plane. Minutes before takeoff, she had wondered aloud if she'd see her children again. The wreck answered the question with brutal finality, turning her eerie intuition into legend. Her prophecy came true. Johnny Horton was known for barroom ballads about fate and fury, yet few listeners realize he envisioned his own violent exit. He told friends that a drunk driver would someday send him over the edge of daylight, and the prophecy became a half-serious campfire gag on tour. On a foggy November night in 1960, he finished a set at the Skyline Club and slid behind the wheel of his Cadillac. Miles later, a pickup veered across Highway 79, slamming into him head-on and fulfilling the nightmare. Horton, only 35, bled out while the radio still played his latest hit, proving that sometimes the loudest warnings are whispered long before the crash, and audience applause can't drown approaching doom. Farron Young spent decades swaggering across honky-tonk stages, yet the neon glow dimmed painfully in his later years. Record sales vanished, radio programmers chased fresher faces, and applause faded to a hollow ring. In December 1996, he scribbled a farewell note admitting he felt invisible, worn thin by memories of vanished glory. He taped the page to his living room door, rang an old friend, and whispered that the emptiness had grown too heavy to breathe. Soon afterward, he reached for a revolver, offed himself, and left the note behind as a brittle monument to stardom's cruel decay. Every crack in his buttery baritone now sounds like a plea echoing from that silent room, reminding listeners that fame can turn on its maker with ruthless speed without mercy. Tammy Wynette stood beneath hot lights singing about standing by your man, yet behind the bouffant hair and rhinestone gowns, she weathered turmoil. Chaotic romances, ruthless tours, and medical nightmares carved hidden scars. During her final hospitalization, tubes tracing fragile arms, she told a nurse the hurt inside ran deeper than any lyric she'd voiced. She whispered regret over turbulent marriages and the pills that numbed more than pain, saying she wished she'd escaped toxic love before it soured her remaining years. These bedside words weren't theater. They were a soft surrender from a woman who spent decades belting heartache yet seldom found calm herself. When her voice glides through midnight radio, listeners now sense that final confession lingering between notes, haunting the silence of every encore forever. Keith Whitley possessed a lonesome tenor capable of silencing packed honky-tonks, yet he wrestled with bottles that stalked him like shadows. On a quiet May morning in 1989, he poured coffee and admitted, voice cracking, that he feared he could never outrun the drinking demons. He'd tried clinics, pledges, and fresh starts, but they all felt like sand slipping through desperate fingers. Hours later, the friend returned to find Whitley unresponsive, having OD'd on liquor's relentless pull. That confession now echoes through every trembling note of "Don't Close Your Eyes," revealing the tragic clarity of a man who saw the storm, named it, yet couldn't change the forecast. Each spin of his records reminds listeners that honesty alone can't always anchor a soul against addiction's ruthless tide. Dottie West once dazzled audiences with glitter suits and open-road optimism, yet financial missteps shadowed her later life. After refusing to wait for a limo at the Grand Ole Opry in 1991, she climbed into a fan's aging Corvette. The car fishtailed into an exit ramp wall, leaving West critically hurt. In the hospital, bones splinted and morphine dulling agony, she apologized to her adult children for risky spending habits and the headline-grabbing bankruptcy that swallowed her estate. She whispered that stardom had taught her to chase generosity even when pockets were empty, and now the bill had come due. Her voice faded 2 days later, but the bedside confession lingers like a steel guitar sustain, warning dreamers that glittering generosity often comes at a punishing cost. George Jones, the possum himself, survived car chases, drunken lawnmower rides, and binges, yet regret finally tracked him down in quieter twilight years. Sitting in his Tennessee kitchen, sipping decaf because doctors banned stronger stuff, he confided to daughter Georgette that he felt haunted by how he'd treated her mother, Tammy Wynette. He spoke of missed birthdays, shattered promises, and nights when rage drowned tenderness. He prayed she could forgive the father who chose chaos over consistency. That raw admission, given without cameras, stripped the legend of mythic toughness and revealed a man anxious to mend what fame had broken. Every time "He Stopped Loving Her Today" drifts through the air, that kitchen table apology resonates between notes, proving remorse can echo longer than any hit song's final chord. Conway Twitty racked up chart toppers with a work ethic that left little room for rest, yet in hushed hospital corridors he finally acknowledged the cost. After collapsing on tour in 1993, he told a road manager that success had felt like racing a train he was scared to stop. He regretted missing family dinners, school recitals, and Sunday mornings that could have balanced the frenzy. As surgeons fought to mend ruptured vessels in his brain, Twitty whispered that he wished he'd paused the chase to enjoy the ride. He slipped away before sunrise, leaving a bittersweet lesson tucked into the tenor that once conquered pop and country alike. If you never slow down, the tracks eventually outrun the engine, no matter how mighty the locomotive seems. Lefty Frizzell once taught the world to slur syllables with velvet ease, influencing generations, yet the 60s left him stranded. Rock-edged newcomers stormed the charts, and royalty checks shrank like stage lights after Last Call. In a late-night bar outside Nashville, he confided to a bartender that the industry had tossed him aside, leaving him to nurse heartbreak with cheap liquor. He feared he'd become a ghost walking past his own hits. Those words foretold a decline that ended in 1975, when a massive stroke silenced him at 47. The bartender's memory of that confession still drifts across jukebox speakers, reminding every aspiring crooner that trends move faster than legends can sometimes follow, and bitterness can stiffen even the smoothest drawl, leaving aspirations rattling like empty bottles. Eddie Arnold, gentleman crooner of plush Nashville sound, enjoyed record-breaking decades, yet as the century turned, he worried the world would forget the roots he planted. During a quiet interview at age 87, he confessed that the golden era might fade into trivia quizzes, its architects remembered only by crate diggers. He feared that fans streaming newer hits would never know the soft Mississippi drawl that once bridged country and pop. Still, he smiled, saying he'd sung enough love to wallpaper eternity. If history turned the page, At least the melody might echo somewhere. Arnold passed months later, his concerns swirling with the strings of "Make the World Go Away," urging listeners to archive legacies before algorithms bury them beneath tomorrow's playlist, lest culture misplace its original velvet voice. Jean Shepherd blazed trails for women with a forthright twang sharper than barbed wire, but the fight left bruises listeners seldom saw. In her later interviews, she spoke candidly about doors slammed, deals broken, and colleagues who dismissed her as too outspoken. She said the cost of holding ground in a man-ruled arena was nights alone in hotel rooms, wondering if the struggle would matter once microphones fell silent. Yet she never apologized for swinging back. Instead, she hoped future singers could walk through gates she'd battered open. Those reflections, delivered with iron steadiness, peel back the glitter to reveal a warrior's exhaustion, reminding audiences that every breakthrough hit carries hidden dues measured in sleepless miles and swallowed frustrations, and that victory sometimes whispers more than it shouts. Don Gibson penned classics that funded entire publishing empires, yet he often felt like an outsider among rhinestone royalty. Sitting on his porch in Shelby, North Carolina, he told a visiting songwriter that Nashville never fully welcomed his shy nature. He admitted he wrote "Oh Lonesome Me" from a real ache that interviews never captured. Approaching his final days, he wondered aloud if anyone would remember the nervous kid behind those regal melodies. The confession revealed a paradox. A man whose words connected millions still felt adrift inside the circle he helped draw. Every twang of his Gibson guitar now hums with that porchside vulnerability, proving that success doesn't always silence the echo of self-doubt. Yet that very doubt kept his pen honest, carving lines that pierced forever. Red Foley blended gospel warmth with barn dance charm, but personal scandals once threatened to drown his hymns. Late in life, he confided to a close friend that tabloid whispers had eclipsed the spiritual solace he wished to leave behind. He feared listeners would remember rumors before recalling "Peace in the Valley." Still, he vowed he'd keep singing heavenward until breath and bandwidth surrendered. That private admission reframed his final performances. Each gentle syllable sounded like a plea for redemption, signing off from a life both luminous and bruised. When choirs cover his songs today, Foley's confession floats above the harmonies, guiding hearts back to intention over intrigue, showing how faith can wrestle scandal and still hold a fragile note aloft even when fame smears halos with storm clouds. Johnny Cash spent years wrestling dark trains and prison clang, but when June Carter Cash passed, the man in black spoke a softer truth. Gathered with family, he admitted that her departure had untethered him from earthly fear. He no longer worried about his own crossing. He said each sunrise felt like a borrowed encore, and every whisper of wind carried her laughter. 6 months later, he slipped away, leaving a final love letter written in silence. That quiet confession reframes hurt as more than a cover. It becomes a goodbye whispered through cracked timbre. Cash proved that sometimes the toughest outlaw hearts find peace only when the duet ends, reminding listeners that courage can bloom from grief instead of rage and that darkness can cradle unexpected dawns. Jim Reeves piloted his own aircraft with confidence, yet on a storm-stained July afternoon in 1964, he hesitated. Before takeoff, he reportedly confided to business partner Dean Manuel that the weather felt treacherous, but obligations tugged harder than caution. Minutes later, the plane vanished into low clouds and shattered against Tennessee woodland. That private doubt now hovers over every velvet baritone note, turning "Welcome to my world" into a haunting invitation. Reeves's brief uncertainty reminds travelers, literal and metaphorical, that intuition rings loudest just before collision, and ignoring it may cost more than deadlines gain. His story glides through aviation lore like a lost beacon, urging dream chasers to respect the sky and the quiet alarm bells inside their gut before ambition drowns the warning in engine roar. Ernest Tubb, the Texas troubadour, always smiled under a wide resistol hat, yet behind that grin lay miles of solitary motel corridors. During one of his final interviews, he admitted fame had gifted him applause but stolen the simplicity of sitting on a porch at dusk. He spoke of nights after shows when he stared at city lights and felt like a stranger in every town, no matter how loudly crowds cheered. His guitar might have been company, but even its twang couldn't fill the silence that follows ovations. Tubbs' confession reframes "Walkin' the Floor Over You" as more than heartbreak. It becomes an anthem of isolation tagged to relentless travel, whispering that success sometimes trades community for endless roadmaps and that loneliness wears cowboy boots without invitation. Mel Street's soaring tenor captured blue-collar ache, but inside he battled darkness that chart success couldn't hush. On his 43rd birthday in 1978, he recorded a series of tear-stained messages describing despair over fame, finances, and depression that medicine barely dented. He felt trapped between public bravado and private hollowness, saying the spotlight blinded him to simple happiness. Hours later, he offed himself, leaving radio stations to premiere a new single alongside reports of his passing. Those recordings form an audio diary that chills DJs even today, illustrating how smiles on stage can hide storms heavy enough to drown a singer behind velvet curtains. Street's last words ripple through every lonesome verse, reminding dreamers that applause can echo like a cavern when self-worth starts to completely crumble. Marty Robbins conquered charts with gunfighter ballads, raced stock cars for thrills, and loved a crowd, yet in his final hospital stay, he grew reflective. He told close friends he wished he'd written more songs drawn straight from the quiet corners of his soul instead of chasing radio trends. Heart failure left him gasping between sentences, but the regret tumbled out. Hits were trophies, sure, but honest art would have felt eternal. Days later, machines fell silent. That confession now plays backdrop to El Paso. Suddenly, the gunfighter seems to be Robbins himself, hurtling toward destiny, yearning for authenticity at high speed. His story nudges every artist to trust deeper instincts before time drops the final curtain and the set list becomes unchangeable history, etched forever in the studio's shadow. Roy Acuff, king of the Grand Ole Opry, spent decades shepherding younger acts, yet near 90 he gazed at family photos and sighed. He told a visiting nephew he wished he'd traded a few Saturday broadcasts for backyard barbecues and fishing trips. The road had gifted him adoration but borrowed irreplaceable afternoons. Still, he chuckled that he'd probably do it again because music felt stitched to his heartbeat, and unraveling one meant losing both. The bittersweet admission adds depth to every crisp fiddle break, revealing the gentle tug-of-war between duty and domestic tenderness. Acuff's final truth reminds listeners that no crown glitters brighter than time spent with loved ones, and even royalty can crave simple front porch sunsets. Moments impossible to reclaim once spotlights finally dim completely forever. These 20 parting whispers echo beyond tombstones, vibrating through every vinyl crackle and digital stream that keeps the golden era alive. Some foresaw tragedy, others begged forgiveness. A few surrendered to demons they once denied, yet each confession adds flesh to legends, proving that fame never insulated human hearts. When their voices tumble from your speakers tonight, remember the quiet admissions stitched between choruses. Youth is fleeting, glory unpredictable, and love the only ballast that survives every encore. Let their final truths challenge you to call a friend, slow down, or chase a dream before silence claims the microphone. Because someday each of us will utter last words, and the story that follows will be written by those who listened.